Armed pro-Russian groups continue to occupy government buildings in eastern Ukraine, ignoring an ultimatum from Kiev to lay down their weapons and leave. Meanwhile, European Union foreign ministers met in Luxembourg on Monday but failed to impose further sanctions against Russia, ahead of the meeting with foreign ministers from the US, Russia and Ukraine on Thursday in Geneva.
We could now see a move towards much deeper sanctions. The US has talked about the possibility of having sanctions on mining, banking, energy. All those things would worry the Russians enormously because Russia's economy is vulnerable in a situation like this, and the US has shown in the sanctions it's applied up till now that it's very targeted, it's very forensic, it can inflict a lot of pain. What's much less clear is what the Europeans will do. They are generally somewhat more divided and somewhat slower on this whole theme than the Americans have been.
And those divisions are frustrating people on the ground in Kiev, who worry that the lack of a united front from European leaders is strengthening President Putin's hand.
There's growing frustration in Kiev and other parts of Ukraine that seek to unite with the European Union, that seek to closely integrate with the European Union. They see the European Union and the West as being too soft on Russia. They think that these sanctions that have been imposed are nothing more than slaps on the wrist. They are desperate for the West to get more involved, not necessarily by providing soldiers on the ground, but at least in providing more swift financial assistance and potentially arms, modern military technology that could help Ukraine withstand the potential military intervention from Russia.
The EU and the US say they will impose further costs on Russia as long as the unrest continues. But the FT's Europe editor Tony Barber says President Putin is prepared to pay a heavy price to get his way in Ukraine.
He and his entourage would be willing to take the pain of whatever further sanctions were imposed by the European Union and the US. However, that there is some cost already evident must be plain to him. It takes various forms, but not least among them is the acceleration of capital flight from Russia. The risk is that the longer this disorder continues in eastern Ukraine, that the impression is created that the central government in Kiev, that's to say the people who came to power after the February Revolution, simply do not have the authority or legitimacy to keep control of the situation in the east. And that, of course, plays into Russia's hands because it seems to justify their argument that a new solution needs to be found to bring back stability to Ukraine. Now, one of the main reasons for the instability, of course, is that there is indeed some kind of Russian hand behind these gangs that are taking over buildings in one town after another. But the very fact that that activity combines with a question mark over the authority of the central government means that that some form of rearrangement of the power structures in Ukraine is going to be necessary.
The events of the last 8 weeks have really changed the relationship between Russia and the West completely. And the West is never going to trust Putin in the way it has in the past. There are one or two areas of the relationship that are still relatively sacrosanct. The Russians are still supportive of international policy on the Iranian nuclear weapon, but they're worried about Iran's nuclear weapon. And it's not clear yet that they've given up on helping the West in Afghanistan as it begins to pull out at the end of this year. But in many other respects, the relationship is pretty much dead. And there is no real sign of collaboration between Russia and the US on any of the major agendas around. And in many respects, it could only get worse.
Foreign ministers from Russia, Ukraine, the US and the EU will try to defuse the crisis when they meet on Thursday in Geneva. It isn't clear whether that's possible, but it looks like Russia's relationship with the West while Putin is in power will never be the same again. Daniel Garrahan, Financial Times.